Conspiracy Unlimited with Richard Syrett.
On this episode, it's one of the great mysteries of the 21st century. 2 car pileups, one in Paris, one on the M6 motorway in England near Birmingham. Strange flashes of light, disappearing and reappearing passengers, and bodies taken to the mortuary and later tampered with.
I wouldn't rule anything out, especially when you look at the new evidence that's come to light about the bodies in the mortuary. 4 bodies that have disappeared and reappeared, and they have no physical signs of being involved in the crash. Well, that begs the question, who was in the crash and where have they gone? And how on earth did these 4 get to the morgue? And why has it taken somebody, 7 years or so to come forward?
Here's Richard Syrett.
Welcome to your Monday. Once in a while, a story is so incredible, so mysterious that it sticks with you. And once in a while, new information comes forward that sheds light on this mystery, and so it's necessary to revisit and update that story. This is the case with a story which remains one of the great mysteries of the 21st century. Back in late 2009, there was a multi-car pileup on the M6 motorway in Great Britain. Nothing peculiar about that. But when emergency responders arrived at Junction 11 near Birmingham, where the car crash took place, they discovered a number of vehicles on fire. Witnesses reported the pileup began after a strange, blinding flash of light. Most strange of all was that the first 4 or 5 vehicles involved in the crash were empty. No drivers, no passengers, no one found anywhere. Then, about 6 months later, a similar car pileup, this time in Paris, near the Eiffel Tower. Same blinding light. But in this case, the occupants in the lead 2 cars were seen to disappear and then reappear. And there were 4 fatalities. These bodies were taken to a morgue at a Paris hospital. And then from there, things just got stranger and stranger. Colin Hall has been at the forefront of covering this story. He joins me again with an update to this incredible mystery. He is the author of Fact or Fiction, The Paris and M6 Crashes. Colin Hall, welcome back to Conspiracy Unlimited. How are you, my friend?
I'm very good, Richard, and thanks for having me back.
My pleasure. This remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the 21st century, the M6 Paris crashes, and you have been at the forefront of reporting on this and investigating it. For those people who don't know about it, who missed the episode we did, episode 35 on the M6 Paris crash, just give us again the thumbnail sketch of what happened and when.
Well, there were a couple of incidents reported in 2010, they were. The first one took place on the M6 near Junction 11, which is near Birmingham. Reports by Mark Collins that suggested that people were disappearing, bright lights, vehicles abandoned at the front of the crash. Several months later, there was a similar incident, one that was ultimately linked by Mark Collins, that took place near the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Again, very similar circumstances. There was a bright light seen by the witnesses. This time there were allegations that the occupants of the vehicles actually changed their appearance. And it sort of spiraled out from there. It was very much almost like an urban myth, where the reports of one man, Mark Collins, seemed to capture the imagination of a lot of people. And subsequent to that, there was a short video that was allegedly from the crash scene at the M6, and it sort of piqued my interest, completely unrelated and something to do with my work. And I kind of got sucked in as many other people have, and have spent, a fair bit of time researching it, reading up about it, and putting my feelers out to see if there was any more, information to substantiate these claims. And
the book again is Fact or Fiction: The Paris M6 Crashes, Volume 1. Now, is Volume 2 out?
No, not yet. I'm still, it's a time thing for me. I have looked at Volume 2, and also I wanted to have something more substantive to write about. I think Volume 1 was very much a poke in the dark, trying to see if there was anything out there that would make sense and link up. And whilst there is information out there, there was nothing ever really substantive enough to say, okay, here's a Volume 2. Of course, over the last few months, we've had a few things going on. And I feel the urge that Volume 2 may come ever closer in the coming months because, we've had this release of this book, this 126 book, and then, of course, the stuff that brings us together today. I think that eventually I will do one.
So let's just go back to the video that supposedly was taken at the crash scene. Again, this was the M6 crash at Junction 11 near Birmingham in 2010. And again, we had police. Well, we'll talk about the police recording in a moment. But tell me about this video that came out that may or may not be from the crash scene.
Well, this was a very short clip, and the allegation is it's witness footage taken from a car. I would guess by the sound of the music, full of young people, and they simply drive past the crash scene. They drive past the vehicles, and they drive past the line of fire in the tarmac, which, of course, is the line that was caused by the bright light that was witnessed at the crash scene. It's a very short clip. It's 35 seconds, I think. There seems to be a lot of panic in the car, and they just drive off.
Do we know the source of the video?
No. Again, like so much that has been, sort of linked to these incidents, it always leads to a dead end. There's a YouTube account that goes nowhere, and then of course people reposted it into their own sites. I think the Museum of Weird posted it into theirs and a couple of others, but there was no sort of person that came forward and said, "This is me. I was involved in this crash." I would love to talk to them if there was such a person.
But does it clearly show that there is a line of vehicles involved in the pileup? Do we see the lead vehicle where the passengers are strangely absent? They seem to have vanished. Do we see all of that?
We do. It's a very murky bit of footage, but we do see it. We do see the line of fire. We do see the truck. We know from subsequent disclosures that there was a truck involved in this, allegedly. So, yeah, we see all of what we believe are the components that make up what is this M6 paranormal crash.
Now, the other thing that we talked about last time you were on was this police recording. We also talked about it on Coast to Coast AM.
Yes.
Do you have any further updates? First, tell people what that recording was, what we heard on this alleged police recording of the crash from an officer on the scene, and then if there are any updates, fill us in.
Well, what we hear are officers, first response officers actually going to the scene of the crash on the M6. And in amongst the chaos that ensues, obviously, we hear a lot of sirens and stuff going on in the background. The officers clearly say that this is an RTA. Now, that was a bone of contention because somebody wrote into me and said it should have been an RTC. And then we have the officers claiming there was absolutely no one in the vehicles at the front. So, very intriguing clip. And I've always maintained motive and endgame and what was the motivation for that. There's been no updates per se about this because I've had no further interaction with anyone who claimed to have been involved in that.
All right. Now, to the Paris crash scene.
Yeah.
Again, and this is near the Eiffel Tower. This happens several months after the Birmingham crash. Again, flash of light. Passengers disappeared, but then they reappear, and we have fatalities. How many fatalities again?
4 people.
4 people. What did they? I don't think I ever asked you this. What did they allegedly crash into?
Apparently, they crashed into each other. There was a clash of vehicles, which again is what we're being told in this interview that has sprung up on me over the last week. So we have a scenario where we have 2 vehicles. We can picture this racing towards the Eiffel Tower, involved in a collision, and bang, the 4 people are killed.
And these are the 4 people in the rear vehicle or the lead vehicle?
Across the 2 vehicles.
Across the 2. So a total of 4 in 2 vehicles. They are seen to vanish, and then when they reappear, obviously they're dead. Is that correct?
That's correct. Again, these are some unsubstantiated witness accounts from Mark Collins' report suggesting that witnesses claimed they disappeared, then reappeared, but they were of a different appearance.
Do we know how their appearance changed?
Only that they were visually different. We don't know any other thing than that. Okay.
And again, Mark Collins, give us a bit of a background. What scant details we have on this gentleman?
Well, again, another one of these cul-de-sacs that appears every so often in this case. This is a guy that clearly took it upon himself to write a series of reports across both incidents, and claimed to get close to somebody by the name of Detective Roger Silverton. Now, the Silverton character was allegedly feeding him a line, and he was taking this information and feeding it back into his reports and then releasing these reports. They were fairly detailed, in fairness. And part of what came out of this interview I've just done does corroborate a lot of what he was suggesting happened. Of course, what we don't know is whether the corroboration is off the back of what they've read or if his corroboration is off the back of what actually happened.
Okay. Now, again, Silverton, what do we know about him? Is he real? Can we verify?
We can't verify him. He's, again, completely untraceable. I have to say that isn't unusual. That isn't unusual at all. I think I made reference to this book that I've read. I've read a few times, actually. This is a person who claims to have been a police officer, claims to have been involved in a drug bust that went terribly wrong, and then took leave, and then took a desk job, allegedly working for one of the UFO departments buried within the police and within the military of the UK. Completely unverifiable. And, I have to say, we come off the back of what's just happened with this Akari Babchenko, this Ukrainian or this Russian journalist who was dead one minute and alive the next. It's almost at that scale, this person. There is absolutely nothing about him anywhere that I can find, yet there seems to be this ominous presence of him within everything that happens.
All right. There was also word of police sort of working on some sort of a code or breaking a code related to this case?
Yeah, now this is all related to the 1 of 26 Twitter feed, which is a masterful feed of, on the surface of it, absolute nonsense. I did some digging. Again. What I zeroed in on again, and I have to say, this was a new revelation. I looked at this Twitter feed, which is at 1 of 26, and there's entries, for example, on the 27th of July, that start to bring up, if you Google the coordinates, they actually start to bring up CIA websites within the search called the World Factbook. Now, I don't know whether this is something that's new or whether it's something that's been around for a while, because I haven't searched these coordinates for such a long time. But, for example, the Iraqi Police College is one of the coordinates that is brought up again in the CIA website. So, very strange. Very, very strange. Again, I need to do some more digging on this. But, there are locations like Fukushima, Hiroshima, the River Somme, of all places, the Yangtze River, in amongst this sort of smorgasbord of coordinates. And the CIA website, it ranks about third or fourth on these searches, which is a little bit unnerving. And again, it's something that I don't recall when I looked at them, albeit it was a few years ago.
It seems like it's just getting more confusing and convoluted and more mysterious rather than us getting more clarity. It just seems to be getting more complicated.
It does, and it also smacks of someone or a few people who are trying to mask either their identity or their agenda. I did a comprehensive review of this book, and there are certain things about it that really do sort of tie into this whole theory of a whistleblower putting out something that is subverted enough that it will go under the radar, but has, if you connect all the dots between the 1 of 26 feed, this fantastical book that I've read, and then all the other information we have, there's clearly a pattern here of something that needs to join together. Quite how, I don't know. Maybe that's the second book, is how to join this massive information together and see how it all fits in. Certainly there's something there. Certainly, when you look at things like the CIA website looming large on certain searches, there's someone somewhere trying to tell us something, although quite what, I actually don't know. Is there an equivalent of Silverton on the French side? Do we have any whistleblowers on the Paris crash side? No, there's a couple of officers named here and there. There's a guy, I think he's called Francois Blanc, who works allegedly for the Gendarme Nationale. It doesn't strike me as somebody who comes across as a Silverton character. Silverton, from what I can see, is very much somebody who is right on the fringes of where we would perceive an officer to be. If they are feeding information to Mark Collins or to somebody else, and they're feeding it as a way of whistleblowing, then clearly they're not going to take up a position and put their public name out there for fear of their own safety, as we've seen with journalists just recently and many other people who are in the public eye or who have been caught up in whistleblowing. Assange, Chelsea Manning, you've got Edward Snowden. All these people have either risked their lives or had to go through serious changes of lives to protect their own freedom. And Silverton could be that person. This book could be that mechanism. I don't know.
Back to the Paris crash for a moment. One of the most bizarre aspects of what is truly a bizarre story on the whole, the bodies are taken to a morgue, and there is some closed circuit security camera footage of someone going into the morgue and tampering with the bodies. Explain what we see or what we hear about that.
Well, yeah, again, there's been a couple of bits here and there, a couple of snippets of a suspect wandering around a hospital. Now, in fairness, until I stumbled across this person this week, or about a week ago now, it was very difficult to corroborate any of that because, a couple of people I know who are French have said that in France, there are no CCTV cameras in hospitals. It's against the law. So, here we are confronted with evidence that clearly, allegedly shows a suspect, yet when we flip back to this, I'm being told that, that actually isn't possible. There would not be a camera in that particular room. So, again, it's counterintuitive because you think, well, that should be there, but it isn't there, and then we get told it is there. And it's just been a question of trying to delve through all this disinformation, this fake news, if you like, to get to the bottom of what actually happened in that morgue, which to me is pivotal in this case, because I think if we can unlock what happened there truly, then I think the rest of it could start to fall into place, because I think people at that point start to come forward a bit more.
So whether or not there was a security camera there or not, the report is that it showed an individual going into the morgue where these 4 bodies are being stored, and it looks as if this person is removing some bodily fluids or something. Tell me more.
Well, basically, we've been told that this person is going in there. They have some sort of syringe device, and they are injecting bodies. Now, to inject a dead body is almost a futile thing. I mean, I checked this out with a couple of medical specialists. And what we're being told here is that this person walked in, injected dead bodies, but for what reason they had no idea. Because in their opinion, up until this point, there would be no benefit to do that. Now, of course, that is science as we know it today. And this is another thing that I've been querying is, where did the suspect come from? And what on earth were they doing in a morgue? And what on earth were they doing in there with a syringe? Because to take that risk, you would have to assume they would have prior knowledge to know that taking the risk would return some form of a reward. Well, the only reason why you inject anyone is to, put something into their body.
Are we 100% certain that they were, well, we're not 100% certain of absolutely anything regarding this case, but is it not possible that they were not injecting something into the body, but extracting something from the body? Because a syringe can be used that way as well.
It can be. And again, we weren't, or I, and I still am not certain of anything that happened in that morgue. What I have from this interview that I did just about a week ago is some form of corroboration that there was 4 bodies, 3 were injected, 1 was not, and the blood return or the blood test results from the 3 matched, but the 4th did not. And there was an anomaly in that 4th body. Again, this is something that was flagged up by Mark Collins, in his report. So, of course, we have to return to the devil's advocate position: is, was this interview based around the report, or was the report based around what actually happened?
When you said the blood samples didn't match, they didn't match what? What do you mean?
Well, the notes I've made, and I've gone through this again several times in this interview that I did recently, 3 of the bodies, their blood test results were normal, absolutely normal. But the 4th body, and I quote their word, bubble, the 4th body, the blood test results came back and suggested that this person had no level of pollutant in their blood. So you or I walking around the streets of, I don't know, Toronto or London or Manchester, we breathe in a certain amount of pollutants as we walk around, yeah? And that gets absorbed into our bloodstream, and it starts to take in, and it comes out in our blood test results. Well, 3 of those bodies tied in, absolutely tied in. The 4th body, the blood was completely pure, off the Richter scale. So it's their opinion that 4th body, or that 4th person, couldn't have lived and breathed in our atmosphere almost. It's almost as if they lived in a bubble, in their words.
Right. Now, one more little loose end to talk about, and then we'll get to your latest information in this interview. And that is the elevator footage, which people believe, or researchers on this case believe, is the person in the morgue. And that I've seen a sketch of this person. I've seen what appears to be a closed circuit photo, or a security photo, or still from a video. Tell me about that.
Very simply speaking, this is a tracking shot, if you like, of this particular person. Now, there are 2 or 3 sightings that tie in with this person being that, that is the chief suspect, and that is the person that, that I'm being told, in this evidence that I'm looking at, is the chief suspect. And that was all it was.
This person, based on this footage, or this still photo, appears to be African, perhaps Middle Eastern.
Yeah, I mean, yes, yeah, I would say more African than Middle Eastern.
And that's all we know at this point.
That's all we know. The footage was silent. There's no sound to accompany it. And then, of course, we have images of the syringe, so that kind of ties in together with this person, because clearly in the elevator footage, he makes motion into his jacket.
Conspiracy Unlimited with Richard Syrett.
Colin Hall, the author of Fact or Fiction, The Paris and M6 Crashes, is here with an important update on this fascinating mystery. All right, now to the latest. Who did you speak to? How did you get in contact with this person?
Well, about 2 weeks ago, I put a blog post on talking about a theory about this whistleblower theory. And having read this thing and researched it and gone through it several times, I felt quite strongly about this. I posted it. Somebody got in contact via the blog about it, claiming to be the morgue technician at the morgue at the Petit-Salpêtrière Hospital on the night of the break-in. I have to say there's been, a few emails going backwards and forwards, and I can only take it on face value. But this person has got a lot of information that appears to corroborate what we know. And it's quite interesting because, again, I always look at endgame and motive. Why on earth would you wait for so long, knowing this thing's been out for so long, to then suddenly come forward and say, hey, I was the morgue technician. I was there the night that this person was caught in the morgue. It doesn't make sense to hold back for so long unless they're covering something up, unless they're fearful of being discovered. They may have changed jobs. There are a whole plethora of reasons why this person would hold back. The only thing I would say is that they took time to sit and do an interview via Skype. It was a bit of a patchy interview because the signal was terrible. But over the 6 or 7 minutes during that interview, this person declared or stated a lot of things that I already surmised, and solidified those thoughts I had into a testimony. Whether this person will remain in contact and come forward again as and when I need them, is another story.
Were you able to establish this person's bona fides in this particular area of expertise? I mean, did you quiz this person to figure out whether, in fact, they might be a morgue technician?
I did as much as I could in 7 minutes. I mean, I have a fairly limited medical knowledge. One thing that did amaze me somewhat it was the allegation that the bodies were heavily sedated, and that in their opinion they could not have driven those vehicles. Now, of course, that ties in with the fact that people suggested that people disappeared and reappeared during this bright light. I think it was it succinylcholine has been mentioned on a few occasions, actually.
Repeat that.
Succinylcholine. It's a sedative.
A sedative. Okay. Succinylcholine.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. This person alleges that there was enough sedative in these 4 bodies to render them useless. They couldn't drive. And that also was compounded by the fact that they suggested that the condition of the bodies was not conducive to somebody who'd been involved in mass trauma in a vehicle accident. So in their words, they had 4 bodies in a morgue that had no physical signs of being involved in a crash, and also had enough sedative pumped into them to render them useless in terms of being able to drive. So that's quite significant, because that ties back in to the whole area of people disappearing and reappearing again. And it also ties into this body tampering report that Mark Collins put out, which was somewhat, I believe, corroborated by Silverton, albeit he didn't go as far. He kind of pulled back a bit.
It sounds as if then there was an autopsy performed on these bodies?
Yes, there was. I mean, there is no doubt there was an autopsy performed. The interesting thing is they were asked to sign off the reports cause of death as a car crash. And that was against their judgment.
Was this individual present during the autopsy?
From what I can gather, yes. From what I'm being told and from what they are saying, there's no reason for me to believe not. I mean, they have too much information about what was going on there at the time.
Was he able to provide any other details about what these individuals, these 4 deceased individuals, looked like? Male, female, approximate age?
No other details. She didn't advise me of anything else other than we had 4 bodies. 3 were injected. The 4th had a different set of blood results in terms of this whole issue about the pollutant content within the blood. They mentioned that it had never happened before. They were called in the middle of the night, and the suspect was there, handcuffed and being sort of guarded by the police. And it's kept on going on about the fact that, she was adamant they could not drive. So there's too much sedative in the bodies to allow them to be able to drive. Now, if you're involved in that level of detail, then one would imagine you were involved in that autopsy. Right.
Now, I just want to come back to something you just said. A suspect, this was the person who was seen on camera tampering with the body. This person was apprehended?
Well, yeah. I mean, this person, there is, I think, have you seen the footage in the police cell, the interview?
No, I have not.
Right, I'll get you the link to that. There is again, some very shady footage of a suspect being interviewed in what looks like a police cell. And they throw the syringe in front of the suspect. The suspect doesn't say a dicky bird, doesn't say a word, sorry. So, yeah, I'll send that to you. I thought I did send that to you, to be honest.
Okay, so we do have a suspect, but we don't, obviously there's no reportage on this. We don't have anything in the mainstream media to report on. Okay, any other questions that you asked this morgue technician during your Skype interview?
I think the big thing that I was pushing for is the integrity of the bodies, and the fact that, for me, the most important thing was that these people could not have driven the vehicles. And for them to be put in a position where they had to sign off the death certificate or the reports to suggest they had been involved in the car crash, I think that was a huge thing that I had to zero in and just get absolutely clear, and to satisfy my own mind that what we have here is, 4 bodies that possibly have they have a connection to the crash because they are allegedly from the crash scene, but the physical appearance after the crash bears no resemblance to somebody who's been in a crash. And this was what I was very, very keen to get nailed down, if you like, because this is the crux of this whole thing. In Paris, we're talking about people that disappeared and reappeared. Now, if they did, then this ties in. This is another little nugget of fact, if you like, that ties in with Mark Collins's reports. And I think that was an important part of our interview to actually, nail down.
And in the case of the M6 crash, we just have an empty vehicle. We don't know how many people were in that vehicle. We just know that there was no one there when the police arrived on the scene, right?
That's correct. There were 3 vehicles at the front, two cars and a truck, and they were all empty.
All empty. So there could have been 4 people. There could have been 15 people, for all we know. Yeah.
I mean, if you figure the average family car holds 5, that's 5, 10, 2 in the truck, maybe 12 or 13 people, certainly.
Remarkable. Has anyone bothered to check to see if there are missing persons reports in and around that time in that area?
I've tried, and there isn't anything blatantly obvious. There certainly isn't a collection of half a dozen people that have gone missing, because they'd have to go missing on the same day.
Right.
Now, of course, if that amount of people went missing on the same day from the same location, then you would imagine that there would be some form of reporting on it. There is nothing out there, and there's nothing, as far as you can delve in to police records, there's nothing that I could find that sort of says, missing persons or anything like that. Nothing at all.
So what's next for you? What's the next thread you're going to tug on?
I think for me, I've got to delve back into the book and have a look at this witness statement that I've got. And I've got to try and establish a link and how this has all come about. I think this witness is very, very important now, because they've come forward and they have corroborated quite a lot. This is somebody who has either taken a great risk and is willing to help solve the case, or somebody who's obsessed with it. I don't know. But I have to take it on face value at this moment in time. So the next thing for me is to go back through all the information I've got and have a look at exactly how this fits in, because there's some pretty serious stuff here that is something I can really grasp onto now, which is something I didn't have before.
Have they agreed to speak with you again?
Yes. We haven't formalized any sort of time or date, but I have their contact details, and I can again request another interview, which hopefully will not be rejected.
Have you put the call out to speak with a Silverton character?
I've tried to subtly and got absolutely nowhere. I may try it slightly less subtly now I've got this interview under my belt, because what I can do with this is the great thing we have in the internet, is we have methods and means to get stories out there fairly rapidly. I've got somebody here that partway corroborates what they were saying. So what I'm hoping is, if this person is still active or even retired, they may now come forward and say, look, this is exactly what happened.
So again, what are the options here if this did in fact occur as it's been reported? What are our options? What are the possible explanations as you see them?
Well, I've always looked at it as a couple of options. I've always suggested that it could have been a military experiment that went wrong. There could have been a diversion, and this whole thing was created to take our eye off the ball, and that something else was happening. I think that's a very real possibility. I think we live in a world where diversions are, certainly more commonplace now than what they were maybe 7, 8 years ago. But it would tie in quite neatly, and we are getting a reasonable amount of disclosure about certain events within the US military, for example, about UFO sightings. People are coming forward now with confidence and sort of suggesting these things did happen. So, a military experiment that went wrong is entirely possible. And the amount of resource and sheer firepower and bloody mindedness to do what they've done would again tie in, because there aren't many bodies of people that would be able to cover up and do what they've done in such a way to completely outfox people. and lead them down another path. And of course, when you look at the 1 of 26 Twitter feed, and like I say, some of it could be nonsense, some of it might not be. The fact that the CIA seems to be lurking in the background on a few of these coordinates, that's raising my eyebrows as well now, because again, there has to be some form of a connection between what these coordinates are and why on earth we've got the World Factbook pages coming up from the CIA. It cannot be a coincidence.
And the seemingly outlandish possibility that we're talking about interdimensional travelers, time travelers, your thoughts on that?
Well, again, military experiment. Ronald Mallet's been referenced in all of this on more than one occasion. Ronald Mallet is very much a believer that time travel is possible. And in fact, he's even stated on some of his blogs that it's probably happened already. I wouldn't rule anything out, especially when you look at the new evidence that's come to light about the bodies in the mortuary. 4 bodies that have disappeared and reappeared, and they have no physical signs of being involved in the crash. Well, that begs the question, who was in the crash and where have they gone? And how on earth did these 4 get to the morgue? And why is it taking somebody, 7 years or so to come forward? Well, there's a fear factor in that. There's a certain amount of fear that, coming forward and saying, I have technically, illegally signed off a morgue report to justify a requirement. There has to be some form of a fear there, and there has to be a plausible reason for that. And therefore, as you quite rightly say, as outlandish as it may sound, the spectre of something being some form of time travel, it can't be ruled out now.
How far are you from Birmingham?
About an hour and a half.
Do they have wrecking yards? I know, like here in the United States and Canada, we have big wrecking yards where it's like a ghost or like a graveyard for cars that have been in crashes, and they will scavenge them for spare parts, and then eventually they'll recycle the metal. Do they have things like that in England?
They do, and that's a very interesting point, because according to certain pages in that book, these vehicles were taken to a junkyard, but it wasn't any old junkyard. This was a controlled area, and they used the word cleansed. So basically, the 3 vehicles that were the prime vehicles involved in that crash are buried somewhere. Again, I do speculate, but probably in some form of military depot, and they are probably never going to be seen again. And that's another thing that's very interesting, because those 3 cars do hold a lot of keys to this. So the mere fact they're never ever going to be seen again at this moment in time, unless somebody can find the yard where they've gone, means that clues will never ever be able to be unlocked.
And I guess that drive-by video by those by the people on the M6 that surfaced, there were no license plates visible, anything like that.
No. I mean, my guess is it was filmed on a phone. Now, going back to that sort of 7-8 years ago, a camera phone wouldn't have been high def. It would have been fairly low quality. Whoever was taking it was bouncing around all over the place. So the only thing you could see were a couple of people stood outside the cars, and then the vehicles themselves, and of course the truck, and then the line of fire.
All right, Colin. Well, thank you for this update. And when and if you hear from this morgue technician in Paris again, please let me know, and we can do another update. And in the meantime, we'll look forward to Volume 2 of Fact or Fiction, the Paris and M6 crashes.
That's great. Thanks very much for having me on.
Thank you. Colin Hall. Well, this story is ongoing, and so I'm sure we'll be talking again before too long. Coming up on episode 75 of Conspiracy Unlimited, ancient Roman forts discovered in the Ohio Valley? Researcher author Rick Osman will be here with the startling details. Until next time, I'm Richard Syrett. So long for now.
A new Conspiracy Unlimited with Richard Syrett drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at conspiracyunlimitedpodcast.com.